Unit 10, Lesson 2 on completing the square. Now I'm going to take a moment to let you guys copy down these notes that I borrowed from Miss Elaine Hill. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this so you guys can get a little bit of a view on as to what's going on here. So completing the square, please copy this down. You may have to pause the video. I am not going to slow down for it. So take a moment to pause. Okay, let's move on and check out the steps. Again, take a second to pause it. Okay, and just a little bit more so you guys can get the idea of what that bottom section was saying. And go ahead and pause it for a second. All right. So again, I'm not going to go through these steps step by step, but we will do them as part of our examples on the next page. All right. So let's copy down this first example. Okay. X squared minus 6x minus 16 equals 0. Step 1 told us to take the constant and move it to the other side. So we're going to go ahead and add 16 to this side and add 16 to this side to get rid of it. So that leaves us with a little bit of hole. So I draw a line and I draw a line. Please make sure you do it this way. The more structured you keep your work, the easier it's going to be. Now, the new number that goes into where the 16 was, okay, is created by taking the middle term, which is negative 6, multiplying by 1/2. So we always multiply 1/2 to the middle term and then square it. So 1/2 times negative 6 is negative 3. Square it, we get 9. So now we put the 9 in the blank here and in the blank there. Okay. This now becomes a perfect square. Okay. We're not sure about this side if it's a perfect square or not. If it ends up being it, makes it easy. If it's not, don't worry about it. But this is the one that we worry about. Okay. So this ends up being, if we do the x method, it's always going to be the same thing. Okay. So it's going to be x minus 3. X minus 3, so I can write it as x minus 3 squared, and I add these two, I get 25. Now, well, how do I get rid of that squared? I square root. I square root this side, and I square root this side. Okay, so I get the square root of x minus 3 squared is just x minus 3. Square root of 25 is both positive and negative 5. So at this point, I can write it out as two different equations. I can say x minus 3 is equal to 5, x minus 3 is equal to positive 5. Okay. And I go ahead and add 3 to both sides, so I get two different answers. Okay, I get 8 and negative 2. So those are your two answers, 8 and negative 2. Okay, let's look at number 2 here. I can say it's x squared minus 10x plus 7 is equal to negative 7. And again, I want to complete the square. That means I have to take the constant term on this side and move it over to the other side. Okay. So I minus 7 on both sides, I get negative 14, and I get a blank here, so I put a line here and a line there. I need to find the number that I need to put on the line or in the blank. Okay, and we get the middle term, multiply by 1/2, and then square it. Okay, so 1/2 times negative 10 is negative 5. Negative 5 squared is positive 25. So I add 25, I add 25 to both sides. Again, I have to do it to both sides to keep the equation equal. Again, the neat part is this becomes a perfect square. So it's going to be x minus 5 times x minus 5 equals this. And you can verify that by using the x method. And again, negative 14 plus 25 is 11. Okay. We take the square root of this and the square root of this. The square root of x minus 5 squared is x minus 5. Okay. That should have been a minus 5 right there. And we go ahead and take the square root of 11, which is plus or minus radical 11. Okay, and again, since I messed that part up right there, it should be adding 5 to both sides, so it's be positive 5 plus radical 11, and 5 minus radical 11, not negative 5. Okay, so please make that correction right there. Over here in problem number 3, again, follow the same steps. Write this out, move the constant term over to the other side. So I minus 1, so I get that. I'll leave a blank. I leave a blank. Okay, I get the new constant term by simply multiplying the middle term by 1/2 and then squaring it. Well, this one doesn't work out to be pretty even, so I can write it as a fraction. It becomes 3 over 2, and I square that becomes 9 over 4. Okay. So this now becomes a perfect square. It's going to be x plus, and you notice that, look at that, that is what goes in there. X plus the term before I squared it is now what's there. Again, let's verify that. Well, okay, before I squared it, that's what it is. Okay, before I squared it, that's what it is. Okay, okay, so before I squared 3 over 2, that becomes part of our perfect square. Okay, and again, I add 9/4 to both sides, 1 minus, and again, we have to make sure we have common denominators. We solve this out, it becomes 5/4. Okay? We take the square root of this and the square root of this. This becomes x plus 3/2. Now this side, we draw the radical sign over. We know the square root of 4, which is 2, so the bottom of it we don't have to rationalize. The top of it is radical 5. Okay, and again, this is plus or minus radical 5, so I can subtract 2 radical 3 to both sides and end up with this right here. And again, I did make a mistake, so I minus 2 radical 3. I minus 3/2 to both sides. Okay, end up with this. This one, because it was done incorrectly, it comes out as unfactorable, but when you actually do it properly, it does come out to be factorable. Okay, so please make that adjustment. It's going to be negative 3/2 plus 5 radical 5 2, okay, and negative 3/2 minus 5 radical 2. So you get the two answers. Okay. Over here, now all these terms in problems 1, 2, and 3, we ended up with a 1 in front of the x squared. Well, if we have a number that's not 1, we have to get rid of it. We have to make it a 1 before we can complete the square. So here's what I do. I take everything and divide it by whatever that a term is. Okay, so since this is a 2, I divide everything by 2, and I get this as my next equation. Well, now, because that's a 1, we can follow the rules. I can go ahead and minus 1/2 on both sides. Okay, I get a blank right there and a blank here. How do I get the new blank? I take 1/2 times the middle term. Okay, 1/2 times the middle term equals 9/16. So I add 9/16 to this side, add 9/16 to this side. Okay, so negative 1/2 plus 9/16, okay, equals 1/16 right there. Okay, and again, this is a fraction, so again, before I squared it, that's the number that comes down here. That's a negative, so it becomes x minus 3 radical 4, okay, and squared because that's a perfect square. Again, to go from here to the next step, I square root, that loses the exponent right there, and this becomes the square root of 1 is 1, the square root of 16 is 4, but again, it's plus or minus 1/4. So I add 3/4, okay, and again, it's 3/4 plus 1/4 and 3/4 minus 1/4 are the two equations that I get, and I can get 1 or 1/2 as my answers. Okay, more examples. Okay, then divide everything by 2 to get this. Okay, once I get that, I subtract over or add over the 3 to both sides, leaving a blank and leaving a blank. Find a new number to put in that blank, and I take 1/2 times the middle term and square it, because it becomes negative 5/4. I square that, it becomes 25/16. And add it to both sides. Again, this now becomes a perfect square, and it's the term before I square it is what becomes part of the perfect square there. So it's b minus 5/4 squared is equal to, now again, I have to add these two together, so I do it off to the side. Okay, I get common denominators, add that, and I get 73/16. Okay, I square root both sides, and I lose the exponent on this side. The square root of 16 is 4. I don't have a square root of 73, so I just leave it as radical 73. I can't even simplify it, so I just leave it that way. Okay, now I have to add over 5/4 to both sides. Okay, and it's a plus radical 73/4 and a minus 73/4. So again, I get this as my answer. I can write this as my answer like that. Okay. Again, here's another example of it. Okay, I minus 45 to both sides. 1/2 times middle term and square it, that's a 6. Squared is 36, so it's y plus 6 squared. Again, add 36 to both sides, gives me a minus 9. I square root both sides. Okay, well that's a minus 9, so wait a minute. Can't take the square root of negative 9. Yes, I can. That negative sign comes out as an I, so it's I plus or minus 3. Okay, and we get this as our answer. Okay, and you might want to actually just write it out as negative 6 plus 3i and negative 6 minus 3i, so to get the two exact answers. Please don't write it the way I've shown it here. Okay. Over here, we've got y squared plus 2y. Well, wait a minute, there's nothing to move over. Well, that's great. We can just leave a blank right there. Okay, and then figure out, again, that's the middle term. Divided by 2, square it. Okay, and we get 36. Negative 4 plus 36 is 32. Solve for it. And we get this. Okay, again, write out the two answers instead of writing plus or minus. It makes it a lot easier for you to understand that there's actually two different answers. Okay, and finally, the last page of extra notes on completing squares right here. I'm just going to let you copy this down and go through it. And I'm not going to talk my way through this one. Okay, so go ahead and take a moment, pause the video, and copy this down. All right, let's go ahead and move it. Go ahead and pause the video and copy this down. Okay, notice the only thing different on this one is we actually had to move the negative 9 back to this side and then fill in the missing piece using completing the square. All right, that concludes our video on completing the square.